Welcome to the Empowered Women Life Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Karen Bashford. This podcast is for every woman who has ever felt limited by her past, silenced by trauma, or held back by society's expectations. Each week, we will share powerful stories, expert insights, and practical tools to help you become the leader of your own life. My guest today is a beautiful lady. I had the pleasure of attending or being a guest on her podcast, which is Together We Seek. And I want to introduce JJ DiGeronimo. She is an author, speaker, podcast host, and creates sacred spaces to explore light energy, practices, and ancient wisdom with healers, psychic, and spiritual teachers. So your journey's been quite interesting. And I'd love for the listeners to be able to hear more about you and what you do now, because it all ties together on what we are all going through at the present. So JJ, please introduce yourself.
Hello, Karen, and hello, everybody. Yes, I did not get up one day saying I'm going to start a podcast interviewing light workers, healers, and mystics. That just wasn't even in the realm. I grew up with minimal means, just near Niagara Falls, and I was hustling from a very early age. I did all types of jobs like, cleaning pools and making bread and working retail and waitressing. And when I got to college, I'm like, which degree pays? Because I do not want to go back to minimum wage. And I landed in computer science. And that took me on a 30-year journey of technology. I worked out of Silicon Valley and I had an amazing life and career. But I had a whisper. I had a deep desire for something else, and I could not put my finger on it for years. And for my 40th birthday, I showed up in Sedona in Arizona, and I was like, please help me figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. Why am I not settled? Why do I feel so much inner turmoil? Little did I know that the rug was going to be pulled out for me 2 years later, where the people in my life and some of my work situations sort of all just disintegrated in a matter of minutes. And I found myself sitting in the parking lot of an old like a monastery, thinking about whether or not to go into a tapping class. And the reality is, like, I didn't know where to turn. And my mom showed me early on that she used to go to this place called Lilydale, which is outside of Buffalo, New York, to meet with psychics and mediums. And I just felt like that was the most logical place to go, is to go where people use energy work to get more answers and alignment. And I believe that was really the beginning of the reason that I'm on the planet. Little did I know back in 2016 that was all going to happen. But looking back now, that was my doorway.
Okay, so before we go any further, for the English people who may not know what Sedona is, could you just explain what that involves?
Oh, Sedona is one of those places on the planet, very similar to Bali, very similar to the pyramids, where there are essentially multiple vortexes, and many people that are into energy alignment and frequency go there or work there or bring people into their homes, to really get insight, wisdom, alignment. It's just one of those places on the planet that people go to, just like you guys have the stones. So it's just very similar.
Okay, thank you. So you obviously realized sitting in that vehicle that you were going to now start something different. So what was that like?
Well, I think I was sitting in the vehicle with the desperation of hoping that I was going to get more alignment. And what I guess looking back now that it's been a decade, I had a lot of inner work to do. I was so drawn and aligned with my external metrics that I really didn't know who I was, and I really didn't love myself. And if I was really honest with myself now, sitting in that parking lot was me sitting there saying, okay, now what? not realizing that I had to do the inner work.
And I could know all about the inner work, and I'm sure there's probably a lot of listeners that also do so. But what did that inner work involve for you?
Yes, 52 chapters in my third book, Seeking, right? So it's not just about my struggle with perfectionism, my alignment with self-doubt, my how I viewed money and the stories I made around money, but it's also the people I chose to be with and how I love myself. It's all the things, all the stories you collect along the way about yourself and really validating, is that helping me? Is that hurting me? Do I need to do the inner work to figure out how I can better interact with my mother? I mean, these are all things that I had to do the inside work. And it took me a good 6 years to really clean out my closets, remove energy in my body that was no longer serving me, and reset the stories that were helping decide so much of my life. So, those stories, those subconscious stories that have been put there years ago through different situations, are often helping you decide what you lean into and what you let and what you move away from. And I feel like I had to go in and do that inner inventory, and energy workers, healers, and mystics are the people that help me.
Okay, so I just want to go back for a minute. And you said that a lot of things were happening in your life that literally basically sounds as though it collapsed your life for you. What was the one thing that stood out for you that made you realize that there was something that you had to do that was different? Can you remember that?
Hmm. I think it came through my relationships. So I think, I had some issues in my relationships with trust and alignment. And I felt like people that I depended on that were on the journey with me, they were figuring their own stuff out. And consequently, some of that was very impactful to my life. And I had people that lied to me or told me things that were right when it was really left. And I felt incredibly alone. And I
Mhm.
feel like that was kind of the moment for me that I realized that I had to depend on myself, that I had to go figure out who I was so that I could emerge, stronger, more aligned, and honestly more trusting of myself.
And that's the big thing, isn't it? It's about being responsible for ourselves,
Yes.
which in our society, it's almost like we've given our responsibility away to everyone else. So obviously, you started taking that responsibility. What was the impact on the people that had stayed in your life when you started taking responsibility for yourself?
Yes, it was slow. I didn't, I'm not a big believer in rip and replace. I feel like, I had to find the windows in my schedule because I still had a very professional agenda and schedule that I couldn't just get up and go to India and sit on a hill or go on a 2-week yoga retreat. I had to fit it into my schedule. And so it looked like Thursday nights going to, um, a tapping class, EFT, emotional freedom technique. Then I would do a meditation, and eventually I started taking mindfulness classes. So it was a very slow on ramp, but it was consistent.
How did it impact your actual work as you gradually got to know yourself?
Oh, it's been magical. It's been magical. I feel like I do a lot of speaking. I have 4 books. I speak to a lot of women's events across the country and online throughout the world. And I would say the more I did my own inner work, the more I was able to be a light for others. I feel like you have to find your own inner flame. And when you find that flame and you turn that little knob and brighten it, like decision by decision, you become a light for a lot of other people. And I would say that my keynotes and even my writing, not only did it become more vulnerable because I was okay sharing what I didn't get right, but it became more impactful. And I feel like I could really exude a level of experiences and choices that a lot of women are trying to decide how to maneuver the landscape. And I think we as society have been told not to turn to energy healers and different practices that make us feel more illuminated. And I feel like that's on purpose. And so I felt some guilt. I
Mhm.
grew up in a very religious, I mean, I'm in a religious family, the family I married into. And I feel like a lot of it for me was I was running uphill by myself. And at times it felt lonely. But I was getting value from it because I was digging through stories that were no longer serving me. I was working through energy that had me stuck in a lot of ways. And I feel like there was more benefit than there was downside. And I just trusted it and kept with it.
Okay, so what did trust look like initially, and how did it shift for you?
Yes. So trusting for me was just continuing to show up. That was what trust looked like for me. What it emerged into was really good boundaries. So, I like to be helpful. I like to problem solve. I'll jump in and do things. And what I realized is that I really needed to align with my real yeses, the things that I felt passionate about, the things that I was like, yes, I want to do that. Not like, sure, I'll help you. Yeah, I can just run by and do that. Like, I needed to let that energy go because what I found is that I had to be really true to my yeses. And I wasn't saying no to anybody necessarily, but I would just be like, well, I'd like to help you, but I have, these responsibilities. Maybe this person can help, or maybe here's a website that can help you. So I would still help a little bit, but I wasn't jumping in carrying the boxes for other people as much anymore. And it's not because I didn't want to help in that way, but I was so driven by my own journey that I had to stay consistent to those yeses. And the people I was meeting along the way were really remarkable. And I really believe it was a mirroring of the image and the energy that I was cultivating within.
Yeah, that was the one thing I noticed with myself as I was going through my nervous breakdown. It was like suddenly it was okay to say yes to myself and no to other people. And it's surprisingly quick when you start recognizing that you are allowed to say yes to yourself, how much things change for you. So, having realized that you were doing all this work for yourself, your inner work, and learning new ways of or new modalities to help others, what made you step back and go, right, now I'm ready? I can really take myself out into the world and show myself.
Oh, wow. Well, that took a long time. I mean, I just published my fourth book, Illuminate Your Path, and it's the 6 phases of spiritual awakening. And I would say up to even 3 months ago, I was hesitant to put the word spiritual on the front of the cover. So,
Mhm.
it's a journey and it's step by step, decision by decision. And I still hesitate sometimes to lean fully into where I am on my personal journey because I don't want to make other people feel uncomfortable. I think that's probably what it comes down to. I'm comfortable with the work I'm doing. And I also want to share the wisdom in a way that people are willing to receive it. And I feel like by saying the word spiritual, sometimes that puts people off. And I really had to sit with it for a long time to say, am I going to use the word spiritual? I mean, for me, spiritual is just illumination, alignment to one another. We are all in this together. We are all one. Whether we want to, say that we're all here together and we're here to help each other. And I think for many of us, we've been bamboozled by so much of what the media shares with us, what our different belief systems share. And I think the more we can trust the love from within and align with the love in others, the easier it will be for you and everyone you encounter.
Yes, and I can appreciate the spiritual aspect because I originally was very reluctant to actually state that I was spiritual. But I started to realize after a while that for me, spirituality is just as a being. We are as a being, a bit like you described. And in acknowledging that we are a being, that we have a soul, that we are spiritual, that takes the barrier, I think, away from stating we are spiritual, because we all connect, and we can only connect truly by being a spiritual being. So how do you find, obviously we all attract the people that we're going to be speaking with, working with and connecting with by our own energy. So how do you come across people, or rather how do people react to you when you're actually in a situation where perhaps you've just got somebody starting on their journey? How does that relate?
Well, I think we're all, we're all on our journey, and we stop and start and jump timelines, we come back. And I just feel like I'm excited for anyone that is willing to start being curious or signing up for something or going to a class or coming to one of my retreats. I feel like I'm happy for where they are. And I feel like in the books that I've created, even the last book, I've created the journey. So I don't feel like I have to start way back. I'm like, hey, here's the framework. Here's the plan. This is probably where you are. I've created a quiz so people can just figure out where they are in their path and then start there in the book. Because I feel like sometimes for a lot of us is we just want to feel validated for wherever we are. And I know I felt like that so many times, and I didn't know who to ask or like what I should say. And I feel like the work that I'm doing now is really just to validate, like, yes, you're on the right path. Here's where you are in the 6 phases of spiritual awakening. And here's likely what's going to come next for you. And I feel like for many people, that's just so reassuring that one, they're not alone, and two, they're on the right path.
So I'm going to ask you, what are the 6 phases of awakening?
Yeah, so the 6 phases came out of the podcast Together We Seek. I have almost 200 episodes, and being dyslexic, I started to see a very, very distinct pattern of how people moved through their own enlightening process. And the first is always a crossroads. So something is going to happen, right? You're going to get divorced. Maybe someone's going to pass away. You might lose your job. You might get a head injury. Maybe you have a diagnosis. There's some kind of crossroads. That crossroads represents a doorway. And that doorway is the first step in just getting curious, which is phase 2, getting curious on what is out there. What can you look into? What is pulling your attention? And from that curiosity, it's really where you start to seek and you start to sign up for the classes. You start to get more engaged in certain books or certain authors, different types of experiences. And once you start to really get into things that bring you joy, excite you, or you want to learn more about, that is where you really start to create and cultivate energy. And oftentimes that gives you the process or the space to release and reignite new things that maybe have been inside you for a long time. And once you kind of really marinate in that seeking phase, you often start to shift because your frequency changes, right? Your energy changes. The way you talk about things change, the things you watch, the things you pay attention to. And that frequency shift really allows you to start to emerge into a new band of energy that gives you the momentum. And through that process, many times through the podcast, people are healing themselves, healing their relationships, working through to their next job or next opportunity. And they start to see that the things that they're doing are working. And many of them go from like the emerging stage where they're emerging into the next version of themselves. And when they start to share that with other people of what worked and what didn't, that's when they move into the illumination phase. And that's phase 6.
Okay. So tell us about your other books, because as you say, you've got 6 of them. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's very easy. On my website, JJ DiGeronimo, I have a little quiz, and it's like asks you like 6 or 7 questions and talks about what book is for you, because I've been documenting the journey of women through each of the phases. And my first book was really about having young children and a demanding job, and how do you align your energy and keep true to yourself while you have so many things. My second book, Accelerate Your Impact, is really about how do you get promoted? How do you get on that board seat? How do you get above a first line manager, which a lot of women, that's where their career stops. And then the third book, Seeking, is the inner work, right? when things that are holding you down and holding you back, how do you work through that? And I feel like those books have been the journey of my life since when I turned 30, really. So I've been tracking it for almost 25 years now of the things that I've moved through as a woman, a spiritual being having a human experience as a woman here on the planet. So you can jump into any of the books. And I feel like it's really helps women say yes to themselves, sidestep their fears and self doubts, and align with the gifts they brought to share.
And you touched on something that probably so many women themselves face, and that is being a mother with a job, but wanting to explore more about themselves. There's this huge, I feel, barrier in the way that says, makes them feel guilty. I've got my children to look after. I've got to do the job. Might have a partner that's around and obviously needs attention as well. And then all of a sudden, this desire to learn more about spirituality or to actually start truly looking at who they are and what they really want. What was the thing that you picked up on most with your work? And I don't know if you've got children, but obviously your work brings you into contact with the women that do. What is it that perhaps is obvious to you, but isn't necessarily to them?
Well, I think having children, I think the thing that I've learned most with that aspect and everything else is our children are one of our biggest teachers. And that they pick us and they're watching us, but they know the journey that we're on before they get here. And I think a lot of women hold a lot of guilt associated with their children. And I just remind them and myself is that they picked us and they're here for the ride that we're on. And oftentimes, what I've seen in many of the podcast guests is that their parents, your parents, have taught you one of your biggest lessons that are going to help you emerge the gifts you brought to share.
Yes, and I think I certainly am very much aware, having obviously I'm a child of my parents, just how much their story and their lives had an impact on my life. And I think as a woman becomes more enlightened and more connected with herself, that starts to change. So as a parent, you're actually passing on to your children a different viewpoint, a different approach, even to an extent, a different mindset, because working on yourself, I know that that impacts other family members because your energy changes, so consequently, so does theirs. So what would you say to a woman who, how do I put this, has approached that point where she's seeing that she wants more, but doesn't want to sacrifice her relationships? What would you say to a woman in that situation?
Yes, I feel like I'm in that situation many days, many years. I feel like just carve out an hour a week, carve out 2 hours a week. You know, if that's taking a walk in the park, or if that's signing up for a class, or that's something online, you have to love yourself enough to carve out what brings you joy. Because the reality is, everybody around you will suck you dry. And if you do not create the space for yourself, I guarantee you nobody else will. And maybe one of your biggest tests and lessons is believing enough in yourself that you deserve it and that you need it. Because the more you work on, the more you align with things that bring you joy, the more your energy will exude happiness and alignment, which will ultimately help people around you, anyways. And if you happen to be in a relationship that's keeping you small or blocking you from getting to your joy, you have to be more strategic. You just do. You have to figure out how to find your joy, or what I call your fuel stations. These are things that fill you up And so if that's reading, in the bathroom, if that's having a hot cup of tea on the back patio, if that's going to the park instead of going right home, I feel like for many of us, we need to find our fuel stations because that will shift a lot for us.
What's your fuel station?
Well, I'm a Sagittarius moon, so I'm very much into birth charts. I really believe that birth charts can show you where you are in your life, but also show you what you should align to. So I'm a Sagittarius moon. I love to travel. I love to have experiences. So my fuel stations are experiences and getting out of my house and having experiences. But if I don't have the means or I don't do it, sometimes I just join an online course because I love to learn. That's also Sag moon. I love to learn. So I'm always in an online course. I'm always on Audibles, listening to books wherever I go. And whenever I can travel, I do.
So what would you say to a woman listening to this podcast? What would your advice be for them now in the world we're in at the moment?
Find your fuel stations, no doubt about it. Like, you have to prioritize filling yourself up because you can only give what you have. And if you don't spend time filling yourself up, you're kind of showing up empty for everybody else around you. And that's doing them absolutely no good. So if you're one of those people that are like, well, I just have to do this for this person and this and this and this, and you're running out empty, your frequency is so low and you're probably attracting low frequency people around you. So if you're looking around and being like, yeah, this is not my vibe, find your fuel stations, find what brings you joy and make the time to do it.
And that is a brilliant note to finish on, because I'm certain there's going to be so many women that are sitting there thinking, I really need to do that. So thank you for your time. It's been absolutely brilliant. I will share your details on the podcast text, and I look forward to hearing more about your journey as we stay in touch.
Oh, Karen, this is so delightful. Thank you so much for including me.
Thank you.